Should now be live,
moving,
David.
yeah, it's moving across now. It says preparing, so boom.
You are live, Chairman.
Are you ready, David?
Yes, thank you, Chairman.
Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the Audit Board for Wednesday, the 20th of January 2021, this virtual meeting. I'd like to start off by welcoming a few guests. We have Mrs. Sarah Martin, one of our directors. We also have Fran Chivers, who's our audit manager, and we have Tim Sands, our finance director. And we have two special guests from our external auditors, Mr. Ian Murray and Mr. Keith Mungadzi. Welcome to you all. And we'll now move straight on to item 1, apologies for absence. I have apologies from Councillor Sasha Gosine, who's being substituted by Councillor Adrian Oakley-Dow. Welcome, Adrian. Hope you enjoy the meeting.
Thank you.
And that's the only apology we have. We move on to item 2, declarations of interest. Has any member any declaration to make? No activity on screen. Thank you very much. Item 3, confirmation of the minutes of the meeting held on the 21st of October 2020. Are members in agreement they are true representation? Thank you very much indeed. Moving on to item 4, urgent items. So there are no urgent items. Item 5, references from other committees. There are no references from other committees. We'll move on to the main agenda items. Item 6, report from the external auditor. I'm assuming that Ian or Keith will lead on this.
So I will, Chair. Yes, thank you. So thank you very much, Chair. There are two items in our paper this evening. The first of which is an addendum to the audit findings report that we shared with the board at the meeting in October. I think at that point we were still not finished in terms of the audit itself, and as we went through the last few bits and pieces, we found one issue which, whilst not material, was just big enough that it required us to report that to the board as those charged with governance, and so we issued a very short addendum to the findings report, just to make sure that we'd fulfilled our responsibilities in that respect. And then the second item on the agenda from us tonight is our annual audit letter, which is I think a summary, a slimmed down version of the key messages that were in the findings report that went to or came to the October meeting. This is a statutory requirement for us to issue this. The idea is that it's a slightly more public facing and in theory at least accessible version of our findings. I'm happy to take questions, but there isn't anything in the audit letter in terms of key messages and findings that wasn't in the report that we shared, or the more detailed report that we shared in October, with one noticeable exception, which is in respect of the fee, and we've proposed a fee variation, which we're in the process of discussing with management and Public Sector Audit Appointments Limited, in respect of the additional time that it's taken this year to carry out the audit as a result of the coronavirus pandemic. We're meeting with Sarah and Tim tomorrow, and I suspect we haven't had a chance to have a detailed discussion in respect of that as yet, but anticipate that that's when we will touch on that, and happy to take any questions if there are any.
Thank you for that, Ian. First, I'd like to support your comments about the work our officers put in to support your external report. I have no questions on your report. Any members, any questions on this? Councillor Lloyd.
Thank you. Ian, I wonder if you might just give me a little bit more detail of what's behind this incorrect house price index comment that you've made. and whether we need to take corrective action in future years. I notice we're not taking any action on it this year, but if you could just explain exactly what's happened. Is it the wrong month we've taken or the wrong index? And then maybe Mr. Sands can tell us if we're going to change our process going forward, please.
So I must admit, with the passage of time, I can't remember exactly whether it was the wrong month or the wrong index. I think it was the right index, but possibly the wrong point in time. Or in fact, it may well have been that the index was just updated between producing the accounts and us signing the audit opinion. So I think my take is that it wasn't a particularly significant issue, and I think that the part of the reason for not adjusting, and I will let Mr. Sams have his say, was that it just doesn't have a material impact. And so at that point, making the changes through the accounts, which would have hit a number of areas for what isn't a material adjustment, the cost benefit, for want of a better phrase, didn't really make sense. So I think the other thing I would say is that what we're not questioning the method, so the underlying the how. I think it's just this one specific bit of information which, when we compared it to the information we had available, was slightly different, but again not resulting in a material change. So from my point of view, there's nothing that's a fundamental issue in terms of processes or arrangements. It's just one of those things that happens occasionally, and sometimes clients are producing accounts at a point in time using one set of information, and we come along 2 or 3 months later or a bit later, and we've got a slightly more up-to-date piece of information which gives us a slightly different answer.
Thank you for that, Ian. Any other members got any questions, or officers any comments on this report?
Oh, sorry, Chair. May I ask Mr. Sams to comment on the same question, please?
By all means.
Yeah, thank you. Sorry about that.
Yeah, thank you. Happy to come in on that. The index, the work on that was done by a new member of staff who picked that up the first time. It looked fine, sort of on the face of it. There was indexes there. When it was reviewed, the index didn't match with the current index that was published by government. And I think that's as far as I got in working out why the index was different from the working paper or not. We couldn't actually work out sort of where that index came from. So I can only assume it was updated. But in any case, it wasn't significant enough to cause too much concern. And that obviously will be, triple checked next year.
Okay, and for everyone else's benefit, what we're talking about here is the valuation of our assets, and there's an index that's produced, which let's just call it the average house price index, if we want to make it more relevant to our own personal circumstances. So, in an accounting sense, you sort of say, well, actually, you might well have paid that much for the house all those years ago, but this is what it's worth today, and it's the calculation of that what it's worth today. But both of you are saying it's immaterial, and that next year you'll get the right one, and it's not a big issue. I'm satisfied with that as an answer. Thank you.
Thank you. If members have no further questions, are you happy to agree with the recommendations? Thank you very much indeed. Before we move to the next agenda item, I must make an apology, because if we have people watching this externally, they may wonder who David Hook is. I didn't introduce him. For everybody's information, Mr. Hook is our committee coordinator, who sorts all this meeting out and supplies the agendas and makes it all run smoothly. So my apologies, David, for not introducing you earlier.
Thank you very much, Chairman. Not a problem.
Thank you. Moving on to agenda item 7, and I believe this is with you as the audit manager, Fran.
Yeah, sorry, Chair. I was just trying to unmute myself. So good afternoon, members. So my report details the progress and the outcomes of internal audit since the last report that I presented in October 2020. Since October 2020, times have changed yet again, and actually myself and all of the DBC employees within the internal audit team have been redeployed on a part-time basis to help with the frontline community response to the pandemic. It is a part-time redeployment, so we're not doing it full-time, but obviously nonetheless I am expecting it to continue until the end of the financial year. And of course that may then have an impact on the work that we deliver internal audit wise for this financial year. We are very happy to do that, and actually I just want to say that I am really grateful to my team for stepping up and doing that work. Obviously it's completely outside the scope of what internal audit would normally do. We're not a frontline service, we don't deal with the public as a general rule, but they have done really well, and I am really grateful to them for stepping up and doing that without complaint, and they have been happy to do that. I do still envisage that we will be able to deliver an end-year annual opinion, so I'm not worried that we won't be able to do that at the moment, but again I will keep members updated, and I am due to bring a further update to Audit Board in March. So moving on to focus on what we have done. Since the last Audit Board, we've actually issued 5 further final audit reports, and summaries of those are in Annex B for you. The outcomes of these have been largely positive. So you'll see from the pie chart on page 36, I think it is, that actually the majority of the work that we've issued this year has been substantial assurance. And that includes all the work that we've issued to date this financial year. And that will form part of the annual opinion that I'll present in July. We've only actually had one limited assurance audit, which we presented last time, and that was the work on cyber security. But as I've set out in paragraph 21, I think it is, we have actually, the organisation has made substantial progress towards delivering on the actions that were agreed, principally with the purchase of a new disaster recovery solution, which we're expecting to be in place by February or March. And that will go a long way to achieving some of those actions, and hopefully towards us then being able to bring up our assurance level on that piece of work. I think possibly the piece of work with the most findings for this time round is maybe the counter fraud assessment. So that's something that we haven't necessarily done before. So what we've done is we reviewed counter fraud arrangements across the organisation as a whole. And I think fundamentally what we found is that what we really need to do is make sure that we've identified those fraud risks. So currently the organisation doesn't have a comprehensive fraud risk assessment. And so, of course, I can't therefore sit here and say to you that we're managing those fraud risks simply because we haven't necessarily identified what they all are. So the first step is for myself and the counter fraud manager to undertake a really comprehensive counter fraud risk assessment with managers within the organisation. And from there, we're planning to develop a counter fraud response plan to prioritise where we put our resources. And that again will come to a meeting of this audit board for members to have a look, review and comment upon. Now, the next item on the agenda is actually the strategic risk register. And of course, the fundamental principle of internal audit is that we provide assurance as to where risks are being managed, and so that you get assurance that risks are being managed, or maybe where those gaps in assurance are. And so to that end, I have started to link the internal audit assurances that we provide to that strategic risk register. That's just underneath paragraph 13 for you. And that is something that I will carry on doing for the reports for this financial year. And then when we present the internal audit plan for 2021-22, again, you'll see that the internal audits that we're proposing are linked to the risk registers, that you can really properly see where you are getting assurance on how the organisation is managing its key risks. I have requested, within this report, I have requested member approval for a couple of changes to the plan, which for expediency, I have again discussed with the chair outside of this meeting. So the first one of those is the removal of the response to the COVID-19, which is actually a really key piece of work for the organisation to undertake. But simply because of my team being redeployed into the frontline response, we are no longer sufficiently independent to undertake that piece of work. So what I've discussed with Sarah and Tim is that next year we can look at doing some bits and pieces that internal audit hasn't been involved in, but actually a coordinated review of that response to the pandemic probably needs to come from elsewhere in the organisation, or at least facilitated by someone else in the organisation. But we are unfortunately no longer sufficiently independent to do that. And then the second amendment that I was proposing was simply changing the audit that we had proposed of the IT service desk for an audit of governance of IT change control. And the reasons for that are set out in paragraph 9. So I just believe that that will, at this moment in time, add more value to the organisation. And then finally, under internal audit performance in paragraphs 25 and 26, I reference the external quality assessment. At the time that I wrote this report, we hadn't yet had that external quality assessment, but that did take place in the first week of January, and we have got the draft report. I am pleased to report that the external quality assessment did largely align to my own self-assessment, which is always a relief. And of course, while the assessment found that, yes, there are a lot of standards that we are conformant with, equally, there are some key areas for development, which overall the assessor decided that we are partially conformant with internal audit standards rather than generally conformant with internal audit standards. And so amongst the standards that we aren't conformant with, there are some reasonably quick wins. But principally, we need to improve the consistency of the quality of our work, and we also need to improve the efficiency of the service. So I think probably those of you that have been around for a little while will know that one of the concerns that we've had for a few years now is audits simply taking far too long to do, both in terms of the timeline and in terms of the budgeted days. So that's something that we really need to focus on over the coming months, but we are working as a team to address that. So sorry for that rather lengthy introduction, but happy to take any questions from members.
Thank you for that, Fran. A couple of comments first. Firstly, I'd like to thank your staff for all they're doing. Half of them are trying to keep the internal audit going, but the rest on the front line services. I think all members welcome what the officers are doing in that regard. Just a word on the external assessment. As I said to you at the pre-brief, I was interviewed at great length. And we did make a couple of comments along the lines you said, but the external assessor was fairly happy with the direction of travel, shall we say. He was aware that we hadn't got all our ducks in a row, but he seemed to believe that we were working to a good target, shall we say. And he's generally pleased. A question about the home working review that you've undertaken. Am I right in believing that hopefully when the pandemic and everything else is done, we're going to have a better look at home working? And to that end, will it become a formal piece of work that we will get a report on?
So I think with regard to the home working, what we really need to do now is because obviously as we start to roll out with the vaccination programme, what we really need is for the organisation to decide where it wants to be in terms of home working. So does it want staff to have a mix of home working and office-based working? Does it want to be geared for one rather than the other? And I think once the organisation has made those decisions, and I think once the two new directors are both in post and a little bit more embedded, what we really like to do is do a more cultural piece of audit work, so that not only do we look at how has home working impacted what we've delivered, so how has it impacted our outcomes, but how has it impacted the culture of the organisation, the way we work with each other and the communications that we have. And that would be a more formal piece of work, probably undertaken in maybe Q3 or Q4 next year. And then, yes, brought back to this audit board.
Thank you for that. Again, to go back to the external auditor, part of what he said was that in his view, the work that we're doing towards the pandemic with some of our officers hasn't impinged on any of our services, which is quite good to know. Has any members got any questions on this agenda item? Councillor Lloyd.
Well, first I must say that I think we've made the right decision to prioritise services to our residents through the pandemic as opposed to sort of inward-looking activity, albeit that inward-looking activity in audit in this case is vital stuff. So what I'd just like to do for the sake of governance is just ask you to describe to me the process you went through to postpone some of these planned internal audits. Where was that approved, and what process did you go through, please?
Are you talking specifically, which audits are you talking about specifically?
Well, the ones that obviously we're almost we're more than halfway through the year. You've got 8 completes out of 23. So you've got quite a few that are non-started. So you're clearly well behind on the plan. So could you just talk to me through your process as to why you prioritise some over others? I'm not disagreeing with it. I just want to ensure as a governance committee that we're happy with that process, and you haven't just parked the ones that you regarded to be high risk and we were most at danger of, and things like this.
No, so I think, I mean, one thing that we did do this year that we haven't done in previous years is to have the plan A and the plan B, which of course, so I've already got a plan that has been partially prioritised. So the idea is to still carry on with the plan A, and albeit that some audits might push into next year, actually in terms of the plan A pieces of work, obviously I've asked permission from Audit Board to remove the COVID lessons learned piece of work simply because we are not independent enough to do that. I think underneath the COVID lessons learned, you've got the COVID-19 recovery piece of work. Now, of course, when I put that on the plan at the start of the year, I hadn't necessarily expected us to still be in response phase right now. So I think that one is one that, yes, it's a completely valid piece of work for internal audit to do, but it's probably better off done in April or May. And those are already discussions that I've had with Sarah and with Tim, and they're happy for us to do that. Number 13, corporate project governance. That's another one that I envisage will be done, but that one had intended to look at Acacia Hall. And at the time that we put it on the plan, Acacia Hall, I think, was due to complete in September, whereas actually now we know that it won't be completed until February. So allowing for snagging probably won't be handed over until May or June. So that's another one that we think will probably be done next year rather than this year. And then actually all of the other ones on plan A, I am envisaging that will be completed. Does that answer the question?
I think so. And this has been tracked through Sarah's management, has it?
Well, Sarah and Tim's management, because obviously Tim, now being Section 151 officer, has responsibility to ensure an adequate and effective system of internal audit. So Tim and I have monthly meetings where we look at internal audit progress. But fundamentally, if anything has to be removed from the plan, that would come to this audit board for approval.
That's wonderful, thank you. And as I said at the beginning, I do agree with and thank you for turning your sites to providing service to residents as opposed to this vital work, which I know you do. But thanks for that explanation. I'm satisfied with that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other Julie? Sorry, Councillor Ozog.
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah, so absolutely. Thank you for all the work and your officers as well, and stepping in on the COVID, as has been said. Mine are very quick and simple questions. I think you mentioned with regards to the counter fraud that will be brought to the audit board later. I just wondered if you've got a time frame on that one.
Yeah, so fundamentally, the fraud risk assessment isn't a quick thing to do. So Glenn and I, so the counter fraud manager and I, want to do the counter fraud risk assessment across the council next financial year. And then what we were envisaging doing is bringing the counter fraud response plan and the internal audit plan together for the following financial year. So it would probably be either this committee next year or else the March committee next year for the fraud response plan.
Okay, thank you. And one other point, I think is probably just more curiosity than anything, is with regards to the audit for facilities management. Are you expecting much change in the stance on that, given the working from home and how the councils had to operate over the last financial year because of COVID lockdowns and things like that? So I'm just wondering if there's going to be much of a change into how that's reported.
I think there's probably going to be quite a significant change in scope, because obviously when we put it on the plan, it might have been just a general facilities management audit. But now I suppose it might focus far more on how we got the building ready for people who do need to go back into the office. And I think a part of it was going to be on CCTV as well. But we haven't actually had those detailed discussions with the service yet to see how we might proceed and what particular risks and areas of scope we might look at. So if it's okay, I'll get back to you maybe at the March board meeting when I'll have a much better idea.
Yeah, that's fine. As I say, it's more curiosity than anything, I think. Thank you.
Any other members, any questions on this? Are you happy to agree with the recommendations? Thank you very much indeed. Moving on to agenda item 8, the strategic risk register. And I do believe this is yours again, Fran.
No, this is Sarah's.
Sorry, it's yours, Sarah. I do apologise.
No problem. Thank you, Chair. So it's been quite some time since we last brought the strategic risk register before the audit board. but we thought it was timely to update it to reflect the emerging risks from both COVID and Brexit. So the report in front of you sets out our strategic risks against our corporate plan themes, and it identifies those risks that may prevent the strategic objectives under each theme from being achieved. There isn't really much more that I can add at this stage, and obviously there's quite a lot of detail within the report. I'm not intending to go through each of the risks, but I'm happy to take any questions. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Sarah. I've got a general question, not on the report itself, but this is a shared service with Sevenoaks. Are we still using two separate templates? They used to use the 16 square, whereas we're using the 9 square. And that, if we're using two separate ones, would it not be easier to both of us work with the same one?
We do use a different template. In fact, we take a very different approach to our strategic risk registers at both authorities. I think they do theirs in a completely different way to us. They don't do it against the corporate plan themes, which we consider. We are going to have a look later in the year, working very closely with Fran, as to whether it's appropriate to continue doing our strategic risk register in the same way, or whether there's perhaps a better way of presenting it. And we will obviously consider Sevenoaks' approach as part of that. But it's not something that we do jointly with Sevenoaks. We do look at our strategic risk registers completely separately.
I was more thinking about whether the template itself was preferable. 16 gives you a much closer detail rather than 9. That was the point I was making. But,
I say that may well consider whether we think 16 is more appropriate as part of our more general view. At the time, we thought 9 was easier for managers to understand, but yes, we'll give that some consideration as part of our review later in the year.
Thank you for that. Any members on any questions on this report? Yes, Councillor Lloyd.
I'm sorry, Chairman. Sarah, maybe you could give me a little bit of description as to how you review these. Obviously, we're not going to go through them one by one today. I'm assuming that as a management team, you do. When you've got the target risk rating, which is obviously after your mitigation controls, where is it actually described that is an acceptable target, or who would agree that we will accept the residual risk that remains after the action plan has been delivered, or is there a sort of a third area where actually it takes us to here, but we're not happy with here, we want to go further? So there's a difference between we're getting to here and we're happy with here, we're getting to here, but we're not happy from here, we've got to go further. Does that make sense? So what is your process for reviewing these as a management team and then agreeing that the amount of residual risk after your action plan is acceptable?
Okay, well, all managers got involved as part of the process. So the strategic risk register, I went through in the first instance and updated for those COVID-related risks and Brexit-related risks that I was aware of. We then shared it with all managers, and they went through their particular areas to make sure that they were happy with the other risks, but they also thought that the emerging risks on COVID and Brexit were fair as well. So we did quite a thorough review to make sure that we'd captured all the main risks as we saw it. As part of that process, the managers would have looked at the current rating and also the target rating, and looked at those mitigations as well to see if there was anything further that perhaps we should be doing to try and reduce those risks. And then overall, the strategic risk register was then taken back to management team for reviews. As part of that process, we would have looked to make sure that we were happy with that target risk rating, and whether we thought there was any further mitigations that we needed to put in place to reduce it still further. In some cases, there's always going to be that risk that you can't fully mitigate, and we have to accept that, but it's understanding that level of risk that we're prepared to accept.
Yes, I understand that there will always be an element of residual risk that you're accepting. That's a documented process, is it, that you've described? I'm
not sure if it's fully documented. It might have been in our original risk strategy that we had. There's the work that sits behind this actual strategy, but we will be updating that as part of the work that I'll be doing with Fran later to make sure that everything is fully documented, so it's a fully transparent process.
Okay, no, this report is very clear to me and it's very good, but obviously I wanted to ensure that there was management scrutiny of it and acceptance of the residual risk. Okay, thank you very much.
Sarah, another general question. Is this a departmental responsibility risk, or do we have a dedicated risk officer? We used to have, I think her name was Noel Flaherty, used to be our risk officer. Does this sit with one person? The reason I'm asking, it would be a single point of contact if any member had any questions about risk. That was my only thought. So is this a departmental thing, or is it the responsibility of one officer?
We don't have one officer that takes overall responsibility for managing risks. It is really down to the individual service managers to take responsibility for those risks relevant to their area. But I oversee the overall strategic risk register. So if any member has got a particular issue, they can always come to me in the first instance.
So you put yourself in the firing line. Any members, any further questions on this report? No, thank you. Do you accept the recommendation? Thank you very much indeed.
Sorry, David, Councillor Oakley-Dow was indicating he had a question.
Oh, sorry. My apologies, Adrian. I didn't see. You're hiding in the corner on my screen.
Yeah, sorry, I may be on page 2. I understand. Yeah, it's. I suspect it might be an unpopular question, and I'm asking from the point of view possibly of naive ignorance, but it is a very thorough report, and it's a very thorough tabulated form which you've offered. The one thing that I noticed, and there was concern given, and there is no criticism, please, in any officers or the report itself, but it does concern me that in all the target risk rating formatted 9 square boxes, reference HS1, reference HS4 are the only 2 which appear to have a target risk rating in the red. That's in the same department. One is, of course, the supply, sorry, not of course. One is affordable housing not delivered. And the other one is, strangely coincidentally, with reference to homelessness. I was wondering if we should have a target risk rating in the red at all.
I think, if I can answer, in respect of both of those risks, some of it is largely outside the council's control, and that's why we don't feel we can necessarily bring those risks down any further, particularly with regard to homelessness. We do everything we can to try and reduce homelessness, but there are things that we just can't do. And particularly in the current climate, we are expecting to see more of an increase potentially in homelessness. So we're doing everything we can to try and reduce that, but we do feel that it's a fair reflection to say that there's still a high risk that we're still going to see a high level of homelessness moving forward. And again, on the delivery of the affordable housing, some of that is outside of our control. We've got the new build programme, which we can control, but there's also reliant on developers as well to be doing an element of affordable homes within their own developments. And again, some of that is outside our control. We try and control it as much as we can through our planning decisions, but it depends on the viability of the schemes as well to a certain extent. So that's why they're still quite high, because I think those 2 in particular, there is an element of the external factors that lead into that.
Okay, good. Thank you. Thank you, Sarah.
Councillor Lloyd.
I think it's a very good point you make, Adrian. I believe it was what was behind my question as well, really, not the specific cases, but you take some actions and you get to a place, and that's where it's listed on this report as a target, but that isn't necessarily an acceptable place. You might want to go further, and hence my question as to whether these were accepted residual risks or not. So I think the answer you've got there is we're taking some action and it's taken us to a place, but I don't think anyone accepts that that's good enough, and that's why it's still in the red. So we will carry on with it unless Mrs. Martin's going to tell me she's accepted it as being at that, and I don't think she will. Yes, but it was a very good point made, I think. Yes.
No, we certainly wouldn't say that's an acceptable place for it to be. We're still carrying on taking every step we can to reduce that still further. But at the moment, we still consider that to be a high risk, regardless of the targets that we're and the mitigation factors that we're putting in place, which is why we're still showing it in the red. But yeah, it doesn't mean that that's acceptable.
Thank you. Thanks very much. It's very clear. Thank you.
Sarah, I'll come back with an old chestnut that I've been banging on about this for years. Because the register a matrix don't come before us very often, and unless the members have the old copies of agendas at hand, they don't know whether the risks have moved. And I have asked in the past, if a risk has moved up or down or sideways, could there be a cursor arrow put on that one so that members know that the risk itself has moved? Because we look at that risk, and for all we know, since the last time we saw it, they may all have gone down or they may all have gone up or whatever. So I'm not asking it for all of them, but if a risk has moved from the meeting before or the last time it was published, I think it would be helpful for members to know if that risk had decreased or increased. Any thoughts on that?
Yes, certainly. I do recall now that's something that you've mentioned before. It's something that we overlooked when we put this together, but it's certainly something that I can build into future presentations for you so that it's quite clear which ones have moved. Yeah. Yes, we can do that. That would, I think, be most helpful. Any members, anything else on this at all? Are you happy to agree the recommendations? Thank you very much indeed. Don't have to salute, Peter, just a nod will do. Moving on to the next agenda item, which is selective invoice checks. And this is with Fran, but I need to inform members that Fran and I have discussed the selective invoice checks, and I have given my permission to suspend them until further notice because of various members of our internal officer corps working on frontline services, and this is taking up too much time. So I hope you're happy with that decision. Over to you, Fran.
Okay, thank you, Chair. So just to reiterate what the Chair has said, we've agreed that for March at least we won't undertake the selective invoice checks. I'm hopeful that we'll be back sort of business as usual in July and able to undertake them, but we won't have one in March. And then just another verbal update. In paragraph 4.2, I referenced that we were planning to do some communications to the organisation, just around awareness of the selective invoice check process, but also around themes emerging. So where lessons have been learned in one part of the organisation, we make sure that other parts of the organisation can apply them. Unfortunately, due to the long-term absence of a key member of staff, we haven't been able to do that in January, but we are planning to roll that forward as soon as that person gets back in February. So we are planning to do it, but just haven't managed to do it in January. And other than that, I don't have anything in particular to draw your attention to on this report, but happy to take any questions.
Members, any questions on this report at all? It would appear not, Fran. So are members happy to accept the recommendations? Thank you very much indeed. And if there's nothing further, I think that brings the meeting to a close. Thank all the officers and members for attendance, and my apologies again, Mr. Hook, for not introducing you earlier. Thank you very much indeed, ladies and gentlemen. The meeting is now closed.
Thank you. Thank you. Good night. Bye.